Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Gaslit Truth Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Teralyn, and I am here with my favorite host,
Therapist Jenn.
oh,
Oh, I'm here.
my
I'm the favorite. I'm the only.
Jen. My microphone has decided to go haywire
See,
again.
this is
This
happening. This
whole
happened
time
last
it was
time.
fine
I
until
know. What's
now.
happening? I
Y'all are
don't
just
know.
gonna
It's
have to deal because I tried to do settings and whatever, but that's the
This
life
is
of
why.
a
Here's the deal,
podcaster.
though. This is why people need to come watch us on YouTube, because then they
That's
can
right.
see the stupid shit we're doing. Because you're just not going to get the full like
The
picture of
full
this unless you
effect.
see what we're doing today.
Right. Well, you have to go to YouTube anyway to see what we're
Yeah,
going
you
to do
do.
today because we are looking at this book right here.
Look at this
Book right
book.
here.
Look at this
Yeah, we
shit.
each have
Yeah,
one.
look at this.
Yeah.
Look
It is
at mine. Look at how
Jen's is so
obsessed.
funny. Mine used to look like
Obsessed.
that.
Oh,
Yes. So for those of
yeah.
you just listening, we're holding up the copies of the DSM-5.
The Bible.
The the Bible. I never got the DSM-5, the TR, because I just think it's stupid and why would I waste my money on it anymore? So yeah.
DSM-5 Teralyn. You should have
Yeah.
gotten it,
Yeah,
Teralyn.
Berlin.
Teralyn.
So,
Okay.
so maybe you guys saw some of my TikToks that get some good views and stuff because I have lit this thing on fire 2 times.
It doesn't burn
Twice.
very well. Oh my
It does
gosh.
not burn. I think Big Pharma made it like this with the
They did.
pages
They
a little too waxy, so we couldn't just have like a burning, like a bra burning, like a
Well,
DSM burning.
listen now, before we start, okay,
Yes.
couple things. Everybody, if you have one of these books and you're willing to join the revolution, especially
Yeah.
all of our clinicians that are out there that are like, I'm kind of on the fence, right? Like, this is important. And at the same time, it's not. Go get your book. It's okay. Get a lighter. You're not going to start your house on fire because they're really hard to
No.
burn. Okay.
They're really hard to burn.
But please
So
be
I
careful
feel
too.
like as we do this, we should sing that song. What is it?
Which one?
Burn, baby, burn.
I
Disco
don't.
Inferno.
Oh, Disco Inferno. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Here, let's start this sucker up here because I'm
All
like,
right. The flames are on.
yeah.
Flame on.
Burn, baby, burn. Disco
Disco Inferno. Burn, baby, burn. And
Oh,
then I'm
yeah,
gonna
it is
freak out
so
when it
hard.
starts to burn.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Burn, baby,
Burn, baby,
burn.
burn.
Ooh, but
Disco
my little plastic
Inferno.
tabs are going.
Oh,
Oh,
no.
yeah, get it. Okay, what do we
I
got
don't wanna
going
get it
on?
too close to my
Oh,
mic. I don't
man,
wanna
look at
light
this.
that thing on
You guys
fire.
see this? It's hard to see. Where's
Oh,
my
no. See, it doesn't even like to burn. It's just
Look at me burn.
smoking.
I am burning. Check this out. Wait, let's move this from
I'm just smoking now.
Oh, no. The obsessive compulsive disorders are burning.
Going.
Oh,
The
there goes the depressive.
pyromania is a thing, and it's going.
Can we talk
Yeah.
about an active conversation I had with my spouse last night preparing for this one? I said, honey, how can I get a blowtorch and legitimately torch my DSM, right? I don't know.
It doesn't even want to go.
And,
It's
and I
just
said, can I do
smoking
that in the
now.
house? Look at all
Yeah.
the smoking I'm getting. Okay, so
I don't have a smoke detector in here, thankfully.
Yeah, I do. So we're just gonna.
Oh no. Well, now I'm just
Oh.
down to ashes anyway.
Oh
So
my gosh, I made a huge mess all over my desk.
that
This
was
is fantastic.
that was anticlimactic, but it was fun at the same time.
It was very anticlimactic. And yeah, I do know that there's some carcinogens that are now actively going through my body. But it's Terry.
Gross.
Listen,
It's worth it.
it's worth the cause.
It's worth the cost.
Goes
worth
against
it.
everything we teach people about what you put in your body, right? And here
I'm inhaling.
breathing in the plastic. Oh my God, so fun.
Gosh, our guest that we had is not gonna appreciate that we just breathed in all that plastic, but
No, I know.
it is what it is.
I know. All right. Well, that was fun. So
That
anybody
was
that's out
fun.
there that wants
Watch
to
it on YouTube. It was a good time.
watch it on
Yeah,
YouTube. Get your DSM out. Try to light it on fire. It's kind of hard, but
that's right.
it's
We
very
need to be in
symbolic.
solidarity on this,
Right.
because Jen, can you just show your DSM one more time? I want to see the sides. Look at what this is.
Don't laugh at me.
Insanity.
Just judging me. Look at this. So here's
What do all
okay,
those tabs
here are
like?
the
You've got to have
categories.
100 tabs in there.
Yeah,
at
here are all
least.
your categories, right? Like your bipolar disorder. We're going to talk about that today. Here's all your categories, your cluster Bs, your traumas, your depressive ones, intellectual disabilities. These are all kind of like somatic stuff. These are all tabbed out. And then within them are all the diagnoses, right?
Look how chaotic that looks anyway. Like that looks
stupid. It's really stupid. And the amount of time and effort and the amount of stock I
Mhm.
put into this is stupid. And I can't wait to talk about it
I
today
will
because
say when
I'm
I
gonna
had
call
the
myself out.
DSM-4, because that's when I was still working in the
Yeah.
system, mine looked very similar. I had all those tabs in the side and
Yeah,
all.
I've got
I got the DSM-5 because I felt obligated to get it. Like, for
Oh,
some reason, if I didn't have it, I wasn't, a real clinician or something because I didn't
yeah.
get the
Yeah.
DSM-5, but there was a time where the general population couldn't even get the
Yeah.
DSMs, and now people have it as, like, nightstand reading. Why?
I
There are better books out there
oh,
to read
there
at
there
night,
are.
just so
Yeah,
you
y'all
guys
need
know.
some ideas, just come this way. Okay, yeah, we got it. We give you
This
some
is
really
not
good
one
books.
of them. This is
Yeah.
not even close to
You
one of
know,
them.
I have this running joke that is it's a joke, but it's very real about how I've got, like 2 advanced degrees, right? And a
Mhm.
license and multiple add-ons, all these add-on
Oh my
crap I
gosh.
did, right?
Yep.
All the like acronyms, the CBT, the DBT, the CPT, the EMDR, the PE, all these things, right? Okay. Um, and this running joke is I've never read a book front to back, like even in all of my
Oh, no.
college years, right? I think this is the one book in my
Holy
life
she's
I've read
read
every
it.
page.
You probably
Which
have.
is sad as all listen, I gotta get over myself here, but this actually pisses me off. I just had that realization because I don't. I have such a hard time reading books, and yet I'm looking at
I
this
don't
going,
either. I just
I
lose
idolize this
interest
damn thing.
midway. I lose interest midway. I'm like, "Oh, this is so good." And then I'm like, it
Ah,
feels like
I
the authors have lost interest along with me most of the time.
I
So
think I've read this whole I mean, clearly I have looked at this entire thing to tab this
and
some bitch
referenced it a
out like
lot.
this. Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. I mean, even the V code page has
The
stuff
V
on it.
code.
V
We
code.
c Here's the deal. In private practice, you can't even use a goddamn V code.
I don't even know. I mean, I don't know. This is pretty crazy. And in today's episode, Terry and I are going to talk a little bit about this book, and we're
Mhm,
going to give a little bit of information on some specific diagnoses, some of the things you maybe don't know about the etiology of them, where they came from, and how they
mhm.
are tied into things that are not so super awesome. But there's
And
a
also a few
yeah,
things about therapists and social workers and diagnosing that you probably didn't
probably
know.
didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
probably
let's
didn't
get
know.
into it, eh? You want to get into it,
We
eh?
Yes,
All right.
because last night, so if you guys don't know our process for podcasting, the
Ah,
night before, Jen and I start texting each other, "What are we gonna talk about tomorrow?" It's always the thing, "What's the topic for tomorrow?" And I
I'm
think
cleaning
both
my
of us
cleaning my desk off.
Yeah,
Just
I think both of us are like,
FYI.
"Please come up with a topic because I'm tired and I don't wanna come up with it myself." And then suddenly, a topic will pop up, and then we will text each other like 16 articles
1,000
about
times.
that
Yes, it's
a
crazy.
thousand
Yes,
times.
I know.
It's the whole
I know.
process,
It
and
is.
every
Okay.
time it happens, my husband's trying to talk to me, and he goes, "You're talking to me in half sentences." I'm like, "I know, that's because 'cause I'm talking to Jen
I
instead."
know.
Like
My husband it's really funny you say that last because Thursday nights we try to do date night. It seems to kind of fall Thursday nights for us, and so usually we're out to dinner,
Yeah.
and you and I are just like going through everything, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Greg,
This is
Terry just said," and he's sitting there last night. He's sitting with me at dinner at the bar, and he's just staring at me. I'm like, "What? What is what?" Like, you don't
He's like, "You're
he goes
supposed to be on a date with me,
Yes,
and you're
he goes, "You
talking
guys are
shop with
like
Terry."
teenagers." He goes, "You 2 are like teenagers." And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, we get geeked out about this shit. So
It is
so
good
let's go
fun.
there,
But
right?
wait,
Oh,
I
oh.
have a viewer comment I wanted
Oh, that's
to
okay.
share.
Yes.
Yes, because, we love your comments, and we love to share them. So if you ever comment and you don't want that to be shared, let us
Yeah, tell
know.
us because otherwise we're gonna
So,
be, like,
yeah,
freaking
I'm
out.
trying to find it because I texted it to Jen, and now there's like 1,000,001 texts after that, that I'm trying to find. So,
Okay. Well, you just holler
oh,
when
here
you
it is. I
find it.
got it.
Oh, alright.
I got it. So this came in through Facebook actually, and it says, "Your podcast is wonderful. Missed my exit twice heading to work because I'm so engaged." Now, we don't want this to be a traffic hazard for anybody, but I was glad to hear that Jen and I are engaging.
Yeah,
So
I'm
thank you
alright.
for listening. Yes,
I'm
I
okay if
love
I'm a hazard. I'm just saying, like, it's
Yeah,
okay.
have you ever been so involved in something you just kinda, like, lose track of where you're at? Like, I have, yeah.
I have too. Usually it's conversations when I'm talking to somebody when I'm driving. So
Mhm.
this actually makes sense. We've got somebody that's listening to us and it's awesome to
When
hear
you
that.
feel like you're part of the conversation,
Yeah.
like,
Yes. Good.
yeah, just so engaged. So thank you so much for that.
Yes.
If you
Thank you.
don't forget, you guys can like and follow us across social media and send us messages and all that, and we'll put your message on the air. So
We
mhm.
will. We will. I
We
mean, as
will.
long as it's fairly appropriate, right?
Unless
I
you don't
mean,
want us to. You gotta
that's
note
true.
that, but all right. So
That is
let's get
okay.
into today.
Let's jump.
So we were talking about the DSM last night, and the thing that it's always funny because we always have a different thing that pops up for each of us when we talk about these topics. So the first thing that came to my mind is, isn't it weird that as therapists, and I'm going to include master level social workers in there because they
Yep.
function as therapists,
Yes,
okay,
they do.
that we have to diagnose people, but none of our formal education was about diagnosing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not think about this until you were messaging last night and asking me these questions. Like, did you ever in your degrees go through some type of class
Of
that,
course.
and I'm thinking, I'm like, no, I don't think so. And the more time I spend thinking about it, that was not a thing.
Mm-mm.
So
It was
my introduction to diagnosing, okay, came when I finished my degrees and started an internship.
so mine came when well, actually, it was when I was working for the state, um,
Yeah.
in one of the prisons, in the max security prison, and
Yep.
I'll never forget that my supervisor there said, "The biggest problem is that therapists and social workers come out of school not knowing how to diagnose." And I will never forget that, and it didn't dawn on me until last night when we were talking about it. I was like, "Oh my gosh, that was years ago," and that was a correct statement, and so here I'm looking up, like, um, programs online last night, like,
Mhm.
to see if it's changed at all since then, because that was, almost 20 years ago, and I'm like, "Has it changed since then?" So I'm looking up current curriculum, like social worker, counselors, whatever,
Yeah.
none of it's in there. And then I thought to myself, even in the state that we're in, actually, I'm licensed in a few states. So in all the states that I'm licensed in, none of them have anything in the required education about diagnostics.
Hmm.
None of them. And I'm like, that is peculiar because we're supposed to know this giant book and how to use it effectively without having any formal education.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be like this, I don't know, coveted book, right? Like we're supposed to be the experts in this
Yes.
book, but yet there's no way to become an expert
Yeah.
unless it's afterwards. So, yes, so Jen and I, our most of our clinical experience was diagnosing people, right? So,
Yes.
it was trial by fire, really. It was on the job training.
It really was on the job training. I mean, so I think it's good for people to kind of know a little bit of history of the start of your clinician, where they come from, where they learn to diagnose, right? Because I think there's so much variability in that, and
Mhm.
people also need to know we were not trained. There were not classes that we
No.
took. Like when you look at other,
You can take them. There are classes available. Like when the
yes,
DSM-5 came out, there are all kinds of
yes.
classes you
And
could
and
go
we
to.
and yes, we
Mhm.
did. Like, I'm talking in your degrees, right? Even
Right.
the because this stuff in this book, and all the versions of this book, this is not new shit, right? Like,
No.
it's not as though, I mean, every so often, right? So many years, uh, they update this, but in general, when you and I were in college back, while you were on the days of the wheel, and I was more, like the days of, not the wheel, cars. Okay.
Horse and buggy.
Horse and buggy, right? Okay. Um, like the classes that we took, right? Jumping around here, but because this blows my mind, but this
Mhm.
hasn't changed that much. So to think that a piece of our curriculum could have been, here are proper ways to diagnose. Here
Mhm.
are the things that you need to know about these manuals. Here are the things that you need to be cautious with these manuals.
Right.
Um, here is an idea. just so that you're aware when you go out from school and you go into the real world and you get a job or an internship somewhere, you're going to have to use this for everything.
Everything.
Whether you are working in a private practice and you are working with insurance companies and you need to put a diagnosis on someone, or you're going to work for the state where insurance is not involved at all, but in order for people to receive any kind of services within the entity
Yes.
you're in, you have to be able to label them with something in here. And
Mhm.
so it really is universal. The ideas are universal.
Yeah.
And yet we're learning about Freud.
Right. What theoretical orientation do you have
Oh
when
my
really the
God.
most important part of what we did was
Yes.
diagnosing
Yes.
people,
Yeah,
you know?
because it's important and it's all not all at the same time, which is what we are gonna get curious about
Mhm.
right today and talk about because
Well, I wanna
w
bring in a different interesting piece of this too, because it's also where you learn to diagnose that's an important piece of this, because if I only learned to diagnose in private practice,
yeah,
it would look very different than when we learned to diagnose working in the prison system, right?
yes,
So
100%.
yes, and so
Yeah,
I even view that as very different. I'm not sure how to say this eloquently, but we were very extremely trained.
yeah.
Our
We
training
were
was very extreme,
yeah.
lots of extreme mental health, and also lots of faking of mental health going on too.
Yes,
So, we had
yes,
to learn to work
yes.
through all of that as well,
But we
you
couldn't
know.
diagnose malingering. Can't do that.
Exactly.
Boy, did I
So
get a lot of
so
fights
then
with
you
people about that.
well, the hard part was the transition into private practice, because most people that you see that are coming to an individual private practice are not severely mentally ill the way we saw them or the way we learned about mental illness, right?
Yes.
So then you go into private practice and you're kind of like, do you even qualify for these diagnoses? Like,
Mm,
and then this kind of will lead into the next part of the topic,
yes. Yes, it will.
But I think where you learned your training matters a lot
Yeah.
in your scope and view of the DSM.
Yeah.
Your population how you
Yes.
view the DSM changes with each population you work with,
Yeah.
so
That's a fair statement. That's a very
yeah.
fair statement to say it that way. I would agree with
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I remember that transition right away, like, into private practice, and I was like and people would say, "Oh, I'm probably the worst you've ever seen in private
Oh my god.
practice," and I was like, You're actually a breath of fresh air,"
I'm still trying to
like,
figure it out. I'm
I
only a
know.
year and a half in, and I'm just like, I don't understand what's going like
What's going
it's
on?
fantastic though to see the other side of it because it has brought me
Mhm.
so much truth about the BS of like this and
Yes.
also like how we diagnosed people. Not only did I not have the training, the
Right.
educational piece to do this. Okay. However, the other thing that I don't know if people know a lot about is as clinicians, when you start, no matter where it is that you start, now I can speak to intake correctional facilities because that is what I did a
Mhm.
lot of in my career. And actually, that's where I started. Okay. Even
Mhm.
my internship was in a facility that was all intake. So people are just coming in. I
Yeah.
would see 20 people a day and
Yeah.
I would get 15 minutes with them. And in those 15 minutes, okay, and this is reality, like
It is
it is
reality. It's
not a lie.
unfair.
There's nothing I'm saying
Yep.
about this that I'm making up, right? Like, but
No,
people, I
it's
don't think people
completely true.
realize this. Yeah, like I had about 15 to
Conveyor
20
belt.
minutes.
Mhm.
It was very much so like a conveyor belt. Somebody would come in, I'd have just a little bit of their
Mhm.
history. If you'd been in corrections before, it was fantastic because you actually had a little bit more
You
and we
got a
could see more
file.
of it.
We had real
Yeah.
files
A
back then. I
real
don't know if they
file.
still
Oh my god.
have
They do, they still have them.
they
They
still
are
have them.
still have
Mhm.
paper files, believe it or
Yeah.
not. Anyways, but I would have just enough time and I would have to put people into these categories, right? Like, are you a mental health
Mhm.
0, meaning you have no mental health needs? You're good. You have none. Are you a mental health 1, meaning you might have some anxiety, some depression, right? Maybe some trauma in your history, right?
Which is really
And
funny to me, I have to say, that anybody coming through corrections, how in the world could they be a mental health 0? That's
right,
just my
it's crazy. It's crazy to me, right?
anyway.
The men's system, I wasn't so sure about. The women's system, we did a much better job of
Yeah.
identifying like a full, better holistic kind of approach and interview and looking at
Mhm.
history and stuff. But so then you're a 0 or a 1, and if you're a 1, you've got a few of these things going on. I might have a little anxiety, a little depression. By the way, if you came in taking a medication, you don't ever get to be a 0. You
Right.
are a 1 right away, or
Ever.
you will never see your psychiatrist, right? So here I
Mhm.
am labeling somebody right away with, I don't know, Yep, major depressive disorder by history, but right now, we've just
Mhm.
got like some unspecified stuff going on, but that's there, right? Then you had to label your MH2s. Your MH2s were the most personality disorder or significantly mentally ill individuals that came through. So these are your major depression, your schizophrenia, your bipolar disorder, right? Schizoaffective disorders, all of these major borderline personality disorder, antisocials, things like that, right? So those were our twos. So you had these different classifications. But within about 20 minutes, I had to put them in one and put a diagnosis on them. Move on, next. Move
Yep.
on, next. And that was my training. So
Well,
I
I
got
I
really good
wanna
at
I
doing that.
wanna add in here, so when we think about clinical training, if most of the diagnostic stuff is on the job,
Yeah.
then your training is dependent on your supervisor
Yeah.
and how much knowledge they have in diagnostics or are
Yes.
willing to share with you. And, I'm on a lot of forums on Facebook and things like that, and the amount of people saying that their supervisors are complete garbage is alarming to me because that's where you're gonna learn the
Yeah.
majority of this business, really, like,
Yeah. You
and
put a
so
lot of stock in your
if
supervisor.
there's a failure there,
Yeah.
then there'd be a complete failure, and I wonder, like, I don't do supervision in private practice for many reasons. The biggest is that insurance won't pay for you. So, anyway. Um, but I wonder how good I would be at it at helping somebody. You'd be great at it, helping somebody understand diagnosing, but now you have a different lens too
Yeah.
altogether.
I have a
So I
completely different
feel
lens.
like unless you've worked in maybe community mental health or a big system, like you're probably not going to get that level of training
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
gotten, in supervision,
Yeah.
so it's
Mhm.
weird, that it
Yeah,
is so
it is so
weird.
weird. It's a
Yes,
weird thing that we didn't have more education on it.
just expected to know it.
Yes, and even more training. And I agree. There's two pieces to this. I think it's as good as your supervisor is, but I also think
Mhm,
it's as like good as you are too as a clinician, because I remember going and saying things to supervisors about this. More so later on in my career, and we did a ton of diagnostic stuff because I focused heavily on that,
mhm.
because I didn't know it.
No,
I
I
did
didn't either.
not know it. Like, I,
And, well,
it's just
thankfully, I
so
had a
foreign.
supervisor that understood that nobody coming out of school knows it, like,
Yes, yes.
so
See, so
that
that
was
was
important, yeah,
yeah.
and I do also recall he would give me, big, thick file folders of
Yeah.
somebody, just random people, like, I had a caseload, but then he would give me more random people, the harder ones, and he would come back and he's like, "When you have a diagnosis figured out, come back and tell me all about it," and so that's what
Yeah.
I would do. I would search this thing, I would dive in, and I'd go back and I'd give him my rationale, and he'd go, "No," and be like, "Shit," and then I'd go back and I'd
Yeah.
try again, or whatever, and I'm like, but still, maybe he was wrong. I don't know.
Well,
Like,
that's just it. And that's what we're gonna talk about today is how subjective
mhm.
this book is. Because
Ugh.
that is it's a scary thing, and it ties into so much research, because how do we do research on diagnoses, right? And how effective treatment interventions are.
Yeah.
We put these labels on people. Once they're accurately labeled, then we put them into treatment interventions, and then we can spit outcomes out in terms of evidence-based practices, whether, because we took a population, right? That
Mhm.
so if that
Well,
population was misdiagnosed,
right.
or
Well, that's not different than, like, thyroid or values of labs and things
yes.
like this.
Yep.
But I do want people to know before we move into that, that if you have gone to this blows my mind. So many people on psychiatric medications who've never been to a therapist, right? So they come into a therapist's office, and I usually will ask people, "Do you have a diagnosis already? Like, what are we working with?" Right? So,
Yeah.
and 99% of the people who have never seen a therapist before, even if they have seen a therapist, by the way, will say no. And then I'll say, "Are you on a psychiatric medication? Like antidepressant?" Yes. And I'm like, "Then you have a diagnosis somewhere. Otherwise, you
Mhm.
wouldn't be on that." And
Correct.
so it's alarming to me to know the amount of people that don't even realize that they actually have a diagnosis, even if
Yes.
they're taking a psych med. And so,
Yes.
or if they've been to another therapist, and I'll ask, "Well, you've been to another therapist, so you should have a diagnosis already. What did they think that was?"
Mhm.
"Oh, they didn't diagnose me." I'm like, if you used insurance 100% of the time, you got a diagnosis.
Yeah, you
Like,
did.
you have one. And
Yep.
so that's an important thing for our listeners to understand, is that if you've been in the system in any way with medication or have seen a therapist, or maybe have even complained in your doctor's office that you feel depressed or fatigued or can't sleep, you probably have something somewhere
Yeah.
that is indicative of a mental health diagnosis. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's important to tell people
Mhm.
because I don't think people realize.
No.
And then when we talk about statistics like depression is increasing, all these things are increasing. I'm like, the people who have this probably don't even know,
No.
So, but it's been coded somewhere
Yep.
so that your provider can get paid. So,
Yes.
it's being reported by insurance companies, the diagnosis going up and up and up, and people don't even realize they have it,
Yes.
So
Mhm.
it's bizarre. It's a bizarre,
Is it
bizarre
though?
thing to me. And no, not really. It really isn't.
I know
Now
we always
everybody knows. I
we
feel like
always
I'm
go to the
blowing the lid
word
off the whole thing.
I know, we always go to the word interesting or fascinated
Yes.
or blown
I
away,
say
and
that
then I
like,
get done and I
that's
reflect, I'm
interesting,
like,
yeah. Is it
actually,
though?
it's not though.
It's really
No,
not
it's
that
not.
interesting.
Like, no, no, which is why we're here today is to talk about all these alternate
Yes.
truths, right? Like, and sometimes people are almost gaslit in some ways because they are not shared. This information is not just openly shared with them, right?
Mhm.
Like, and nor is it. Well, but that's a different. We'll go there a different day. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, let's keep. Before we started today, everybody, Terry and I came up with 3 things that we have to stay on point with because I think her and I could probably talk about this and probably overshare information on this
Mhm.
for hours
Mhm.
because it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So that was I think we covered 1. That was lack
Yes.
of education, and yet we
Undiagnosed,
have
yeah.
to diagnose. Okay,
Yeah.
done.
Alright. Well, wait, one more point. I do have to say when I took coursework, in my PhD
Okay.
on, psychiatric testing,
Yeah.
right? Because I was like, "Oh, did we go over the DSM then during psychiatric testing?" The answer to that is no.
No, I didn't either.
Still didn't. We we
Nope.
we learned how to do the test, and then we still had to
Mhm.
figure out what the diagnosis was
Yes.
after the test,
Yes,
so
and that's
that
one of
wasn't
those
part of it. It was all
same
based on
thing.
the test, the
I
test, the
did
test, the
yep.
test, yeah.
I did the same
How to
exact thing,
administer
actually
and
went
score
back to
the
look at
test.
I, like, looked at some of that because I did all of the I don't have the PhD, but I have all of the
Yeah.
add-ons to do
Yes, she
clinical
does.
assessments, right? And
Mhm.
so I went back and was looking at those, and I'm like, "There's nothing in here."
No. There's n
Yeah, so it's
no.
like
Because when you take that coursework, it just teaches you how to administer and score
score.
that test. Then
Yes.
there's a whole interpretation, which
Interpretation.
is up to the clinician to
Yeah.
interpret, right? So,
Yeah.
that is another area we should do that one day.
Oh, geez, add it
Anyway,
to the
that's a whole other
list.
podcast,
Okay,
but
good. Okay, all right.
Alright, so I found some research because we like to pull up some research.
Yeah.
It was published it's in on PubMed, I found it. So it's called the DSM-5 Psychiatric Epidemiology and the False Positives Problem.
All right, let's
And I was
hear it.
like, "Oh, damn, there's actually research," and this was published in 2015. So, I'm like, "You know what? There's probably more problems now
There
and more
probably are.
false positives now than
Yeah.
ever before." So this still stands. So the goals such as dimensionalizing diagnoses, incorporating biomarkers, and separating impairment. This is the important part, separating impairment from diagnosis. So, because sometimes people will come in and they have some level of impairment, but they might not qualify for a diagnosis, right?
Right.
So, but
Yes.
yet we'll stick them in there because it's
Yep.
close but no cigar.
Yep. It's close.
Were ill considered and mostly abandoned. However, DSM-5's greatest problem and the target of the most vigorous and sustained criticism was its failure to take seriously the false positives problem.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
Oh, boy. That's a bold
Yeah.
statement.
That is a
That's a
very bold
bold
that
statement,
is.
Mark.
That is, yep. So they talk
Mhm.
about increasing symptom options while decreasing the diagnostic threshold for things like substance abuse disorder, elimination of the bereavement inclusion from major depression. So basically saying like if you are bereaved, they took that out of major depression as a reason, now
Yeah.
you're just depressed. I'm like, "My God, when my dad died, I was bereaved for a very long time. If you take that out, then I would qualify for major
Yes, you would.
depressive disorder." Yeah. Even though it
Yeah.
remitted later, weird this is weird stuff. Allowing verbal arguments as evidence of intermittent explosive disorder and expanding attention deficit hyperactivity disorder
Oh, Jesus.
to adults before addressing its manifest false positives problems.
Oh
Yes.
boy. Okay, so in
Yeah.
layman's terms, what does that mean, Terry? That last couple sentences you just read
So,
about
basically what that
ADHD.
means
What does that
is
mean?
if you cast a larger net, you're gonna get more fish, right?
Oh.
So right. So, if you think about that, like, allowing verbal arguments in intermittent explosive disorder. So, most of those are that's a childhood thing,
Yes.
correct? Yes, okay.
Correct. Yep.
So, you think about how many arguments you have with your kids,
Every day.
right? Every day.
5 times a day.
Ev 6,
Maybe
7,
10.
8, 9, yeah,
Every
exactly.
day of my life right now.
Yes.
Every day, and
That is a
it's for the argument.
diagnostic qualifier. They
Mm.
didn't take that out, and I view that as kind of a normal or typical developmental piece of life,
I
right?
love that word normal, even though we try to not use it, because
Mhm,
what you're describing, we're gonna bring in when we talk about bipolar too, in these diagnoses, because yes,
mhm,
they are us having normal reactions, or children having what is a normal developmental
mhm.
reaction, what's happening at that age
To something they
when
don't like.
something they don't like, when they're feeling an emotion, right? They don't
Mhm.
know what to do with it. They have not learned how to process that yet. Um, but nope, that's a qualifier.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I would say that that one would probably be, if you think about it, one of the biggest qualifiers, right? Like, "Oh, yep, they're, always argumentative."
Yes.
Always, you
Yes.
know? So that immediately they qualify for that one piece of it, right?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
yeah, and so when again, I do say this, when you cast a larger net, you catch more fish.
Yeah.
And not every fish belongs in that net. So, when you think about that, or you think about, expanding ADHD to adults, before addressing what caused it. Okay,
Yes.
so I think about menopausal women, right? Like, you see this on TikTok everywhere. All these women suddenly have ADHD,
Yes.
and
It's
they're like,
popping.
"Oh, yeah, it's popping," and they're like, "I'm on a stimulant now, and boy, has that helped me." I'm like, "Yeah, my mom was on speed after she gave birth twice to lose weight, and she felt like a rock star too." You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like, there was
Mhm.
diagnosed, it was the same thing. It was probably a stimulant, some type of stimulant she was on, but we called it speed.
You
Anyway, so
I'm like, "Your mom was on speed?
yeah,
Let's."
well, it wa
I mean,
probably an amphetamine for weight loss at the
yeah,
time, right?
exactly.
This was in
Yes.
the late '60s, early '70s, right? So,
Yes.
but now all these menopausal women who struggle with fatigue, difficulty concentrating, that's a hormonal thing, but you
Absolutely.
would qualify for frickin' ADHD
Yes.
as the diagnosis, and then you're gonna get put on a stimulant.
Stimulant. Mhm.
Yes. So suddenly you have adult onset ADHD, but then these people are, "Oh, I probably had this all along." And
And
I'm like,
now it's finally, yes, it's finally
I've been finally
diagnosed.
diagnosed,
Yes.
and I'm like,
Yes.
or you have some hormonal imbalances going on that nobody's looking at as part of this picture. So then it makes me wonder, I mean, there you can't get something for nothing. So if you cast this net on all these menopausal women and suddenly they have ADHD and you're giving them
Yeah.
stimulants,
Yes.
eventually that stimulant is going to make you feel like shit too, just so you know.
Well, and Terry, that diagnostic net goes even beyond, when you're talking about that, straight in my mind go to my lived experience, right, of being so fatigued, right?
Mhm.
And not sleeping well, and being so tired, and it being, well, Jen, that's probably part of your depression that you have, right? When in reality, guess who was producing no cortisol and trying to
Right.
figure it out all day long? This girl
Right.
right here. And so
Mhm.
when you think about that idea of like, let's get to the etiology, let's get to the root, let's take just a little bit extra time to figure out maybe what the factors are that are
Mhm.
creating the symptoms, right? So
Yep.
so yes, the diagnostic net gets larger because yeah, there's no way we could look at hormones. You probably have ADHD. And
Right.
eh,
Right.
so this adult onset ADHD for women, especially
Mhm.
women that are in their 40s plus. Anytime somebody says that to me, these big red flags in my brain go off right away as a clinician.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Mine
right
too.
away. That's the first thing I think about, right? And a lot of times these individuals come to us and they're already medicated, and it feels
Mhm.
so great, right? Like I finally got
Well, a
diagnosed.
stimulant would feel fantastic, you know?
Yes, I finally got diagnosed and I got the energy and I can clean my house. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Like,
Yeah. But
yeah. Mhm.
why?
Yeah.
I mean, if we just take the question just a step further, get curious, like, why suddenly were you diagnosed with ADHD and you're 50 years old? Why? Or in your 40s,
Yeah.
perimenopause, like, why? Like,
Exactly.
we stop there as if the diagnosis is the why,
Yep.
especially when it comes to ADHD. Like, I feel like ADHD is one of those diagnoses that nobody looks any deeper,
Yeah, between that
you
one and
know?
bipolar, I could just throw them out the door.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at least with depression and anxiety, most people are starting to kind of look for why am I depressed? But I
Mhm,
feel like ADHD is just
mhm.
that's a neurological condition and whatever. And I'm thinking, okay, if it's a neurological condition, why are you not measuring that? Why are you not figuring out if it's actually a neurological
Yeah.
condition
Let's do
before
some
you're
assessments.
medicating?
Yep.
Exactly.
Let's do some we
Let's
can figure that
actually
out
see.
actually.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
instead of just this symptom checklist bullshit, why don't you actually look at someone's physiology before you go ahead and prescribe,
Symptom checklist bullshit. How
Bullshit,
dare you say that?
right?
Rawr.
It's not, I mean, like, and
Oh,
honestly, in
man.
modern medicine,
I
like, instead of
know.
just
I
medicating people,
know.
how about we figure out if they actually need the medication or if that is actually a neurological thing for all the people who are being medicated,
Yes.
all of them. I
Yes.
cannot believe that everybody who's being medicated for ADHD has a neurological condition suddenly. I
Mhm,
can't, I just can't. Like,
mhm,
that is implausible. It's implausible to me that
mhm.
they would all have neurological disorders, all of them.
Well,
And
so this one article, this is like it's very eye-opening when you were talking about these false positives, and then
mhm,
also talking about the things that do or do not have someone meet criteria for some of these
mhm.
diagnoses, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's it. It kind of leads us a little bit into our next part of this. Where
Mhm.
we want to go next here with this.
Well, okay, so before we hit into bipolar, I do wanna bring up
Yep.
how does someone get diagnosed in a doctor's office usually? And so there are assessment tools that are also brought into play, so you don't have to, like, lug out your big DSM, right? So
Yes.
there are assessment tools, and it's interesting to me because the assessment tools are the biggest one, the PHQ-9, was developed by Big Pharma, and there's other ones that are also developed by Big Pharma, but I think the coolest part about this is how ridiculous it is. It was, a Big Pharma marketing person, like,
Yes. Yes.
started the whole thing for the PHQ-9 because he wanted a marketing tool to make it easier for physicians and other prescribers to prescribe Zoloft at the time, right?
Oh boy.
So he
So
wanted to make it so easy that, because I believe at the time when this was developed, it was, many years ago, there was hesitation to prescribe psychiatric medications or Zoloft, like,
yes.
particularly.
Yes.
There was some hesitation there, which
Yes.
rightly so. Now there's no hesitation. Like, what? Like, we need to go back to a little hesitation is a good thing.
Yep.
But anyway, so he's like, "Oh, I know what we need to do. We need to come up with, like, a checklist, and then they'll be less hesitant because they'll see, on this list that these are the qualifications, whatever." A marketing guy, like,
So can you tell people though tell people what the PHQ-9 is in general and how they are actually getting this like I'm literally sitting here and I'm looking through my notes from my doctor's visit
well,
I just had a month ago. I
ah,
was given something similar, but you don't know that's what they're asking
they're
you.
doing. Oh,
You
that's
don't even
interesting.
know it as a patient. You have no idea.
So
Now,
you didn't get consent to have this thing happen.
so on my end, what I can tell you is there is like we have these electronic charts now, which people all know
Mhm.
about, right? Like for us by me, it's my chart, right? And
Yeah,
on there, it asks some very specific, questions that are more so about suicide,
yeah.
about depression. There's usually about 4 or 5 questions. It's really quick and easy. Now you can do those on your electronic app before you go in. If you
Like a
don't do it,
screener.
yeah, if you don't do it beforehand, they are going to ask you these questions right when you sit down at the doctor. Okay, which was kind of interesting. What happened to me is I did them beforehand. Then my
Mhm.
doctor asked me again, and I said, I did this already online. Why are you asking me again? And she had made a comment. She goes, it must not have transferred through, whatever. But if
That's
you,
BS. She just didn't look at it.
I don't know, right? Like, I don't actually, it was her nurse. It was the nurse. I should put the doctor. It was actually the nurse. And I'm like, I already answered these. She's, oh, yeah. Okay. However, that screener, okay, is similar to like what the patient health questionnaire is, which is what the
Mhm.
PHQ-9 is, right? And it's
Yep.
it's because I had this done, but it wasn't, Jen, we're going to do an assessment. Now I'm going to ask you some questions. It was, okay,
Right.
have you felt suicidal lately? Has your mood shifted? Has your
Mhm.
energy shifted? And that's what kind of what a PHQ-9 is, right? Like, and
Yeah, so
people don't even know what's happening.
it's just 9 short questions. That's
Yes.
all it is. It's just
Yes.
9 questions about your mood,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to assess it in the last 2 weeks. So it's in the
Ah.
last 2 weeks, and I think that's important because I don't think that you can diagnose anything that only has a 2-week time frame. In the last 2 weeks, have you felt depressed? Have you had trouble sleeping without any
But
context,
Terry,
right?
that's major depression.
Right.
That's the
Yeah, so
criteria.
you're gonna give me an antidepressant because I said, "Yeah, yeah, in the last 2 weeks, I've had trouble sleeping."
Yes.
Well, in the last 2 weeks, my baby was up with colic every night or had
Yep.
a,
Yep.
an ear infection or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They didn't
I
ask the rest
haven't
of the
slept in 2
questions.
weeks because
Right, I
I'm a
haven't slept
mom. I'm
because
a
I'm a
frickin'
mom.
mother of a newborn.
Exactly. Or yeah, I haven't slept because, I'm in school and things are, or my husband and I have been arguing or blah, blah, blah. This is
Whatever it
a
is. Yeah.
2-week time frame,
Yeah.
not a global assessment. And the PHQ-9 is not meant as a diagnostic tool. It's meant
Yes.
as a screener, which is two very different things, but it is turned into a diagnostic tool to get
It
prescribed
it has. It has.
antidepressants. Mhm.
And I'm gonna say one thing about this, and then we're gonna keep moving because this may have to be another episode. What people may not also realize are those screeners, okay,
Mhm.
are directly connected to patient outcomes,
Mm.
okay, and asking questions. Those patient outcomes are directly tied to funding. The funding directly comes from Medicare.
Burr, burr.
FYI, there is an actual chain of this, and that'll have to be another time. But
Wah,
if you
wah,
want to get curious about
wah.
that, I ain't making any of this shit up. Oh my goodness. I
Which
wish
is
I
still
was.
so weird to
I
me
wish I
because, like,
was.
if you look at this and it's like, during this 2 weeks, and so then we do an outcome, 8 weeks later,
Yeah.
and it's still during the last 2 weeks. It's not during the last 8 weeks since I've seen you last,
No.
it's during the last 2 weeks.
Yep.
So this is just like these short little assessment
I know.
periods
Yep.
that I think this is why so many people are getting on medications, but we always have to keep in mind that these things were initially developed as marketing tools, as a reason to get someone to prescribe. This was Zoloft in particular. Now it's other things, right?
Sure.
And so the thing is, the guy who created this was kind of shocked that then it became a researched thing. And so he
Mhm.
created this thing, or they Pfizer ended up creating this thing because he had this idea for marketing, right? The idea wasn't to help people, it was to market a product, you
Yes.
know? And then it turned into this big tool that everybody uses and it's been researched and evidence-based, and I'm like, that feels so backwards to me. Like,
Yes.
there's such a backward, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's shocking, but I think the 2-week piece of that is the most interesting because your
Mm.
state of being can change daily,
Right.
you know?
Right. Well, hey, I
It
was telling you, I'm pretty sure I was hypomanic last week and pretty damn sure I had a mania yesterday. So let's,
Hey, when my thyroid is off, like, I know it because I become
Yes.
low. I've said that to you before. I'm like, "Yeah,
Yes.
my thyroid's a little off. I'm feeling a little bit low." But if I were to go into a doctor, what do you think they would tell me?
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I'm bipolar, and
Yeah.
then we're gonna
No.
shift
No.
into the
You've got some
bipolar
mental health
thing.
issues and
Yes,
you're in the range, damn it. So it must be mental health. Listen, you're in the
exactly.
range. I don't care if it's low, still in the range.
Right.
Okay. And okay, so this bipolar thing, because we keep going
Yeah.
back and forth on this. So
Mhm.
so when Terry and I were geeking out and doing, the things that we do before our episodes start, this morning I still had this geeking out on the brain, right? Because I had read in several places, including a couple publications that I have, about this connection with bipolar disorder being overdiagnosed, right?
Mhm.
And the drug industry. Okay.
Mhm.
So I started looking some stuff up. And of course, this morning, even like hour before the episode, I'm sending you
You
things
see
here.
the article that I sent you? I'm like, Jesus, no, not
I know.
yet. I'm
I
doing
know.
the
I'm like,
notes.
I can't help it. Meanwhile, by the way, I'm working my other job this morning, right?
Right.
I'm like on the radio, like on a morning show, trying to do that. And I'm like, oh my God, here's a bipolar article I was looking for, right? Okay. It's like multitasking at its finest, which I'm
Yes.
pretty sure is part of hypomania, but thank you.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yes.
so
I'm diagnosing you over here while we speak, just so you know.
so what the article that I had found that I thought was interesting. So I have always not been a proponent of diagnosing bipolar disorder.
Mhm.
And part of the reason why I do not like that, part of it is because it is a very large diagnostic net that gets casted for this diagnosis. It's a big one. I mean, most
Mhm.
people, when you look at this diagnosis, especially when bipolar 2 came into play, a
Mhm.
lot of us meet this criteria, kind of like what you were saying for like some of the intermittent explosive stuff, some of the things for ADHD. Like, if you don't actually take the time as a clinician to spend a good chunk of time over time assessing this for somebody, okay, it's pretty
Mhm.
easy to put this label on people. So I found this article about this, about the drug industry, and essentially there were some studies that were centered on psychiatric outpatients that received diagnoses of bipolar disorder, right? And
Mhm.
they did like a 5-year study, and researchers were finding that in fewer than half of the patients, okay, it was like 43% they identified, the diagnoses were made according to this relevant gold standard, which is the structured clinical interview. Okay.
Mhm.
Which is yet another one of these things that we do to help diagnose people. And basically it was indicating that these individuals were being overdiagnosed. And which is very indicative to why they started this research, because they were saying, the findings were saying that the illness is actually underdiagnosed.
Why do we do that with so many things?
Yeah.
Everything is underdiagnosed. It's all I'm like, I don't it's not
Yeah.
though. It's
Yeah.
not. Like, not
So
everybody meets criteria, if that's the criteria,
right.
but we
So
look at functioning too
yes.
versus diagnostics. Like, if you're
Yeah.
functioning okay and you're doing why is a
Yeah.
diagnosis so important?
Yeah.
Like
So they took this population and had other investigators go back, look at these individuals, at their diagnoses, how they came to fruition with the diagnosis and how they were living, and they found that the illness, like what that was diagnosed according to this structured clinical interview, these people did not have bipolar disorder. Many of them did not. And then they go in and they talk a little bit about marketing tactics, because there, believe it or not, people, there is a very strong tie to diagnosing people with bipolar disorder. The
yes.
kickbacks are huge on that diagnosis, and we won't get too deep into it because of time today. But it is a very reasonable thing to say, that these are connected. So Terry and I start talking about bipolar disorder, and it makes me open up my book. And I'm just like, okay, here we go. So, for people to know, right, there's a big difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, right?
Mhm.
And one of the biggest differences is pretty much the severity of the symptoms,
Mhm.
right? So, people that have bipolar 1 are going to have really more severe highs. That's that mania,
Right, that extreme
right?
mania. Mhm.
Extreme mania, right? But they might not have the depression. They may not have that, right? They may have more of
Right.
that. But then people who have bipolar 2 may have a less severe high. They're more hypomanic, which is me like every other day. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's depression in there too, which is me as well. And I'm
Mhm.
saying is me because I this is how we're gonna talk about this here. Let
No,
me
but
ask you.
that's me too, Jen,
It
like,
is, it is
and
like,
I know for me, that's when I know my thyroid
so
is fluctuating, usually
Terry.
hormonally. Go ahead. Mhm.
I'm going to be the clinician. You be the
Okay.
patient. Okay, here we
Alright, go
go. Are
ahead,
you
yeah.
ready? Are you
I
ready?
am. Is
Don't
this a
mind.
real-time
Don't
diagnosis of
mind the
bipolar?
burning smell.
Go ahead.
It's not an essential oil. Okay, I was trying to find my book.
Thankfully, we only do telehealth, they can't smell the burning book. Anyway, go
Okay,
ahead.
so I want to read what hypomania is considered. Okay,
'Kay.
ready? Terry,
Yep.
have you felt a decreased need for sleep in the last couple weeks?
No.
Okay. What about maybe a little irritable mood that can persist, or a little more energy that you may feel that lasts, a few days in a row?
Yes.
Okay. All right. What about inflated self-esteem? Do you feel good about yourself?
Yeah,
Not not like totally
not
grandiose,
grandiose.
but an
But yeah,
inflated self-esteem,
yep,
feeling really, really good. Okay,
feeling pretty good. Yep.
what about feeling more talkative than usual?
Yes, right now.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay,
Mhm.
alright, ideas that are kind of flighty, sometimes they don't stay together, they might race a little bit. You start something, you can't
Last
finish
night
something.
with you, yeah.
Yeah, okay, here
Sure.
we go, alright. How about being distracted easily?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
like sometimes there's irrelevant stimulation in the
Yep.
environment. You get distracted. Okay,
Yep.
sure. Let's see. How about excessive involvement in activity that could have a bad consequence for it, right? So, like, I don't know,
No.
you might speed in your car.
No.
No,
Mm-mm.
none of that. Okay, all right. And then let's talk about your goal directed activity. Are you constantly coming up with big ideas, trying to do
Yes.
something? Aha. Yeah. I have to giggle when I ask you that one because it's like every other time we meet, we have a plan to take over the world. All right, ma'am, just so you're aware, you have
Mhm.
checked all 5 of the 7 that have occurred for you.
And how
Um,
many did I need to qualify?
yeah. So
Let's
3,
say.
3 or more, Terry. 3 or more. FYI, you're hypomanic, right? But this is the part that's interesting, and I know we're joking about this, right? Like, if I were working with a patient, my questions wouldn't come out quite this way, but it's this
Right.
idea of
How
I'm easily
easy.
how easy it is. That's your
Mhm.
hypomania right there.
Yeah, that's
I
easy.
experience these symptoms on this almost on a daily basis,
Mhm.
especially with my moods going up and down, feeling like expansive, my
Yeah.
self-esteem, distractibility, okay,
Mhm.
big flighty ideas.
Yeah.
Hello, this is me every day, right? So and I've got the depression in my history as well.
Mm.
You could have asked me 2 weeks ago about my depression. There were a few days in a row where I wasn't doing well.
But I wanna say, this would be the qualifier of that people don't ask. Is there a reason for it? And your reason is this med taper too. So, right? So
Right.
that leads me into, like,
Yeah.
substance abuse disorders, right? So
Yes.
many people with, alcohol too much alcohol use or other things will get diagnosed with these. W
Yeah.
would they qualify if they were not using any of that stuff, you
Yes.
know? So
Yeah.
that's and people don't like to that is a disqualifier in the DSM, but I don't think everyone is talking about that or
But
wanting to go down
that's
into that. Mhm.
That's just it, right? And
Yep.
so we look at this as a diagnosis, right? And of course, it even says like right in the book, okay, I'm gonna read this
Mhm.
to people. The episode is not severe enough to cause market impairment, right? In
Right.
your
So you're still
daily
holding down a job, you're
social.
still doing all
Yeah.
things. Yep.
I'm a mom. I've got a private practice. I'm
Mhm.
a podcaster. I'm doing all
Yeah.
these things, right? I have a couple other
Mhm.
jobs on the side, right? But so I'm still functioning, but yet do I experience all of these things? 100%.
Mhm. Yeah.
100%.
Right.
And so I think it's something that's really interesting for people to get curious about,
Mhm.
because it's not
Also,
hard.
well, it's not hard to get diagnosed,
It's
but
not
the
hard.
meds that they offer you are terrible on your body. Like, so that's the cautionary tale. Like, again, you
It
can't get
is.
something for nothing when
Yes.
it comes to medication. These meds are
Yeah.
pretty damn hardcore,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
anyway. So,
Yeah,
mhm,
and again, where does it come from and why?
mhm.
Even and this is the part that people don't think about even as clinicians, right? Like we have to look at why people feel this way. What's going on in their environment? Like not only,
But wait, I gotta add in something. So
uh-oh.
there's some research on there that suggests that people with bipolar have excess amounts of glutamate. Okay, so glutamate is the gas pedal neurotransmitter.
Oh.
So
Hmm.
instead of a checklist for some of this stuff, like even if you think about ADHD, they talk about dopamine,
Yes.
right? Dopamine, you don't have enough dopamine. Did you check?
Yeah.
Did you run labs to find out if that is actually you? If that's the deal? The
Yeah.
answer to that is no. Why isn't there a criteria in here that says stuff about lab work?
Oh. Because Terry, if it's not in the DSM, it's not real.
Not
It
real.
doesn't happen. Okay?
Mhm.
It's not a thing, I
Well, and I
mean,
think so many people are like, "Oh," like, I read all this stuff, and I was finally diagnosed, and then my life changed, and I'm like, "Because of a diagnosis, your life changed?" Like,
yeah.
or treatment, like, they're different things, like, just being diagnosed doesn't mean anything.
Labels are very comfortable, Terry. They
I
they
know.
they, they are. They're comfortable when then you
Maybe
finally
it's me.
know.
I'm uncomfortable with
You know,
labels. I don't want anyone to label me anything. Like, I just
say
wanna be me.
that's exactly how I am too. I
Yeah.
don't want you to put a bunch of labels on me.
No.
But
I
but
especially don't want you to label kids because, I mean, you and I have been through this with kids that we've seen and
yeah,
how negatively impactful it is late or can be later on in their life, you know?
yeah. Well, and so when we wrap up this idea, we look at the start of this, right? The start of this
Mhm,
conversation was this book, right? And not only how much weight and how much this carries for people, for clinicians, okay, for us in our practices, for you to be reimbursed from insurance companies, right? Us putting labels on people gets certain needs met. And I don't know
mhm,
about you, but when I started in the field, this was very important because I
mhm.
didn't understand it. So maybe for me, that's the way I took it because I wasn't trained in this. Like I
No.
wasn't trained in all of the criteria for all of these and how to diagnose them, right? So,
Mm-mm.
but the other thing is this book, there is a cost to labeling people from this book. And this book has some ucky ties, specifically this fifth version.
Yeah, yeah. Specifically, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia.
Those three.
Yeah. Those
Those and
3
yep,
were
those three.
100%. There people involved, the authors involved in those 3 diagnoses, 100% of those authors received money from Big Pharma.
Yeah.
100% of them, which is scary. It's so scary. And I wanted to tie this back into that article because it said the marketing tactics of drug companies are absolutely a contributing factor to bipolar disorder being overly diagnosed. You cannot go to a meeting on bipolar disorder that doesn't have a big discussion right at the start about
About this.
how underdiagnosed this illness is and how doctors need to ensure that patients are treated. These meetings are typically sponsored by drug companies.
Mm.
Mhm. And so I think the more we bang drums on certain things like bipolar disorder being underdiagnosed, ADHD being underdiagnosed,
Yeah.
autism being underdiagnosed, that is the rhetoric that people
It's
latch onto, right? Well, it's underdiagnosed, it's in the media, it's written everywhere, all these places. But is it really?
I had a supervisor that said early on to me, throughout your career, it's going to be what is the flavor of the day? For me in my career, I went
Ugh.
through the flavors I went through were borderline personality
Oh,
disorder.
yeah. Yep. Mhm.
That was a huge flavor.
Yeah.
Bipolar disorder was
Yeah.
a huge flavor. A little bit of the ADHD, but also some of more of the trauma
Trauma
realm.
was a huge
Yep.
flavor of the
That
day.
that
Yeah.
was my flavors. And so for
Mhm.
me, those I have to be very careful as a clinician with those flavors because that was thrown at me so much that it
Mhm.
siloed the way I could view things, just like this book was. And so
100%.
so that was such a good statement. Someone said to me, throughout your career, Jen, you're gonna watch it happen. And the interventions you start giving, what people want to train you in, what the
Mhm.
state is going to focus on, it's gonna be the flavor of the day. And that's what's gonna get
Yep.
funneled to you. And of course that was something I took in. So I've had 4 big flavors and
Well,
it
you
has
can
come,
see the flavor
you know?
trends right
Yeah.
on TikTok.
Yes.
I mean, when we started TikTok, I remember it was narcissistic
Yeah.
everyone's a narcissist,
Everyone's a
and
narcissist.
then
Yes.
it was,
Yes.
dissociative identity disorder, and then autism, then ADHD is a big one right now, and then
They're going
ADHD
through.
for women, and then right, like, it's cycling
It
through
is
the
cycling
flavor
through.
of the day, so we
So
have to be careful.
you gotta be
Mhm,
curious about where it comes from, and that goes back to an episode we did a couple weeks back about what influences us.
mhm.
Pay attention to what influences you, um,
You
because
got
it's
that right.
worth thinking about.
All
Yeah.
right.
So,
Well, that is a wrap for
it is a
today.
wrap.
So make sure you like and follow us across all social medias and send us your gaslit truth at the Gaslit Truth Podcast at gmail.com.
Thanks for hanging with us today, guys, and, burn your books if you got them.
Burn it.
Burn.
Burn, baby, burn.
Disco